Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first full week of May and our continuing discussion of Asian American and Pacific Islander Awareness or Heritage Month. Wanted to kind of continue our discussion from last week where we kind of just introduced, the month and talked a little bit about how the Heritage Month became to be. But I wanted to get into a few more specifics today, specifically, in honor of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's important to better understand who makes up this large and diverse community and who celebrates it, as using proper terminology can help you better be an ally and show support for these Asian communities. Because Asia is the largest continent and it consists of about 50 countries, and it's made up of a little bit more than 4 billion people. There's only about 6.5 to 7 billion people on the planet, so it's a mega continent. Kind of to start, you've likely heard the term AAPI and wonder what it means or what it's referring to. And AAPI stands for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. This term includes all people of Asian American, or Pacific Islander ancestry who trace their origins to the countries, states, or communities of these geographic regions. So, how a person chooses to identify can be complex. But it's crucial for us to educate ourselves about the distinctions between the two groups, because they could be very vastly different. So, for example, who may identify as a Pacific Islander? It helps to look at the kind of the geographic location. Pacific Islanders are people whose origins belong to Polynesia, Micronesia, and Melanesia. This, can include, but it's not limited to, Native Hawaiian, Samoan, Tahitian, Fijian, Papua New Guinea, those areas. And then who may identify as Asian? At least here in the U.S., the Census Bureau classifies Asians as having origins in any of the original peoples of the Far East, Southeast Asia, or the Indian subcontinent, which can include, but it's not necessarily limited to, China, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, Korea, India, Cambodia, Vietnam, or the Philippines. And so that's kind of how the Census Bureau identifies it. But it's also important to note that there are many Asian communities across the world that may or may not identify as Asian due to its proximity to Europe. So, like Central Asia, so Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, a lot of the former Russian satellite countries. They may or may not identify as Asian due to how close they are to Europe. So it's always that's always an interesting way to look at it. And the same can be said for people from West Asia, so Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Israel, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, and then even like in the Middle East, United Arab Emirates, Turkey, Yemen. Again, these are part of kind of their own little subgroup of the continent, but they are all Asian residents. So again, it's important that we make sure that we understand our terminology as we move forward with our discussion. So I wanted to also add in a few little statistics that I think is really interesting about Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders here in the U.S. The U.S. Asian population is projected to reach about 46 million by 2060. To give you an idea, the nation's Asian population passed 10 million in 2000. So within 60 years, we're expected to go from 10 million to 46 million. So that's almost that's a huge increase over the next couple of decades. So that's how large the U.S. Asian population is growing. In case you're wondering, Chinese Americans are the largest Asian group within the U.S., making up about 23% of the Asian population. It's about 5.5 million people. The next two largest groups are Indian Americans, which are about 20% of the total, and then Filipinos, who are about 18%. Vietnam, Korea, Japan all have populations of at least 1 million or more in the U.S. And again, the other 13 groups are about the other 12% where what's included. Something I thought was really, really interesting is that nearly half of U.S. Asians, about 45%, live in the West, with a third of those in California alone. As one would probably expect, California has the largest Asian population, about 6.5 million people. And to give you a kind of a context, so they have the largest at 6.5 million. New York is the next closest at 1.9 million. So that's really the biggest difference. And then if you add California, New York, Texas, New Jersey, and Washington, almost 60% of all Asians in the U.S. and Pacific Islanders live in those 5 states alone. So really, really interesting. One final thing that I think is really interesting is, as a plurality, about 55% of Asians live in the West. About 24% live in the South, 19% in the Northeast. Only 12% live in the Midwest, where we are. So if you consider the four main geographic regions of the U.S., so the West, the South, the Northeast, and the Midwest, we in the Midwest only have about 12% of our population as Asian, which is the lowest in the country. So again, it's not a, but again, those numbers are rising, especially in larger cities like Chicago and Indianapolis and Columbus. A lot of big growth there. Finally, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are projected to be the nation's largest income group by the middle of this century. So it's actually supposed to surpass Hispanics by 2055. So in that case, Asians will make up about 35% of all U.S. immigrants, where Hispanics will make up about 34% according to population projections. So it's so important that we really focus on these statistics and learn more as we can about Asian American and Pacific Islanders, because again, the numbers not only are increasing, but increasing at a large rate. Well, it'll be a very dominant minority group within the country in the next 20 to 30 years. So again, just some more information to share about this group and about Heritage Month. And again, we'll come back next week and discuss some more information. Hope everybody's doing well and have a great week. Bye-bye.